Hello, welcome to another episode of Dr. G at the Heart of Healthcare. Today, we are going to talk about helping children navigate grief. They're often left out of the equation for dying, death, and end of life when a family member dies. So I have an expert here to help me, Francesca Lynn Arnoldy. Hello, how are you today?
Hello, Dr. G. I'm good. How about you?
Good. So happy to see you again, everyone. Yeah, we got to hang out in Vegas at the City of Hope Interdisciplinary End of Life Symposium. Francesca had a workshop on the opening day. Then we had our vendor tables and we did our book swap. Look, I have my memory lane book here. Right. And so we're going to talk about this map of memory lane because this is for the children. And it was just great to meet you and talk about everything that you've been doing in the industry. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And likewise. And it was so wonderful hearing your talk in the main symposium and your perspectives. Just so valuable.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we share the mission to help empower and educate people. And so that's what we're doing. So you're way over there in Vermont on the other side of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And just thank you for all you do. So let me give a little bit of background. I know on your website, you're calling yourself the Contemplative Doula, but you're an author, educator, researcher, the original creator of end of life doula program. It was in 2017 in Vermont, and you founded it. You ran it for 5 years, and that's actually how I found out about death doulas. That's when you were a guest on End of Life University, and I didn't know anything about the field, and so it's so funny that it's full circle that I'm connected to you because I heard you a while ago.
I love that. Amazing. And then I feel
Yeah.
like City of Hope, they bring together such an amazing community. And so it just felt like kismet that we got to actually share time and space there.
So awesome, so awesome. So everyone, Francesca, she does a broad spectrum of things. We're going to have a link to her website in the show notes. But today we just want to talk about the children again because they're often left out of the equation when these topics come up. So let's jump in. So we did this book swap, and so you have this book, Map of Memory Lane. But I first want to highlight this article I found. From the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it's entitled Childhood Grief is More Complicated Due to the Pandemic and Marginalization. So, we see that children, they lost time in school, they were, at home. All of us parents, my kids are older, but we were trying to figure out how life was going. But just wondering the impact on the children. What do you think about that, just in general?
Yeah, I mean, there was so much disconnection and fear. A lot of kids felt isolated. I mean, for a lot of children, school is their community, it's their outlet, it's their chance to socialize. And when all of that was taken away, it left people feeling extra stress, a lot of overwhelm, and just a lot of fear about everyone's health. And then during that time, what we saw was I was running a research study with the Vermont Conversation Lab about grief. We were catching grief stories during the pandemic. And what we found was, people were still dying of just natural causes and the types of diseases that we had been seeing. That continued. And additionally, people were dying of COVID. And so death was different, no matter, we were all impacted by COVID in so many ways, but the people who experienced loss during that time, what we found was there were just so many additional layers there of disconnection, again, distance often from their people, from their person that they maybe wanted to be at their bedside, wanted to maybe share those final moments and words with, and they couldn't. But then also with their people, like their network, their neighborhood, their village, to come together and mourn together. That was lost as well. So many complications really came out of the pandemic.
Yeah, and I know you wrote so many, you have so many other resources for folks, but again, the children, they're often, we do our best putting food on the table, laundry, all the things we do. But again, we have to address them so they can also process their grief and losses, because these can turn into childhood traumas that become adult traumas. And, we have 40, 50, 60-year-old people that are still affected by the things that they experienced. Um,
Yes.
losses
Yes.
that were not addressed,
Yes.
and so and they can be really devastating and go to the next generation. And that's where we start talking about generational trauma, because that father has not dealt with, their adolescent, trauma. And so it's still showing up and they're reacting out of it. And so the awareness being created for that is wonderful. So let's talk about this book, Map of Memory Lane. So tell us the inspiration behind it, and how you came up with the title for children.
I would love to. So, the story behind the story is a conversation that I had with my grandmother 30 plus years ago. And I just had to say goodbye to this grandmother about 6 months ago. And so, this to me is our continued bond that we shared, and this memory that I get to actually hold in my hands, which is really special for me as now a person who is grieving that kind of loss. So back 30 plus years ago, my grandmother and I were standing at her kitchen window, and we were at the sink. We were doing dishes, and the light was shining through the window, and it was hitting her face. And I looked up at her, and I noticed that she had some wrinkles. And I was little. I don't know, maybe 7 years old or so. And I looked up and I saw the wrinkles, and just being an unfiltered child, I said, "Gram, are you going to die?" Just clear out of the blue, out of nowhere. And, I think it took her by surprise. And then she kind of gave a chuckle in as per her usual character. And she said, "Well, yes, someday I will die, but that's okay. And I have really loved my life." And so she was able to hear my question and receive my question and actually address it and give me an answer that was comforting. And it wasn't too much. It wasn't too much information. It wasn't overwhelming. It was just enough. And it let me know that if I had more questions that maybe were tricky and had difficult answers, that I could go to her. So in honor of that conversation, I created this book. And in it, the child, Lee, has a little bit more tact than I did. So Lee asks Nana, "Nana, will you live forever?" And in the book, I actually don't talk about death or dying directly. It's more of a coping technique to hopefully present to children in advance of loss, a conversation that we can have in advance of loss. Of course, sometimes we have to wait until it actually happens, and then it's still a tool for that to give people language, and also how, a way of managing and navigating grief, which is to lean on memory lane, which is the place that we can go to connect with our beloved relatives, neighbors, friends, and even pets as well, and celebrate those moments that we shared together.
That's fantastic, because that reminds me of a quote from a movie I like to watch, The Equalizer 2, actually. And one of the characters in there says, people die twice, something to the effect of, people die twice when you stop talking about them. And so many times when people are navigating grief, I guess the people who are trying to support them don't want to bring it up. It's like this kind of, we don't know, since, you and I are death workers, we kind of lean into it. But sometimes people don't want to talk about it. Sometimes it'll make them emotional. People don't know what to do. But I like how you normalized, when you want to revisit memory lane, and it's an actual place that you can go. It's a cherished place to go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I created an activity book that goes with the picture book so people can print off a PDF. And the opening page has some tips about having these conversations with kids, because we know it's intimidating. We know it's hard. And so how can you approach it as an adult? How can you support kids through this conversation? And then the following, I think, 4 pages can become an actual memory lane keepsake for people. So kids can color, and adults might add in some stories. Kids might orate their memories, and then the adults can add that to it, and they could put in pictures, photographs, mementos as well, and can continue to print off pages and add to it. So this could be a project that potentially a grandparent and a grandchild could do together, even while they're alive and enjoying life. And then it could become a legacy keepsake eventually, or following a loss. And it could be about an uncle or an aunt or a neighbor or a pet, any person or being that has been special and loved.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I know we're focusing on children here, but I can think of like some young adults that could use this, or anyone that can use this. And I like the utility of it being done with that person. This can be for hospice. When we have families with children, we can recommend that they buy this book, and help them, and get the workbook on your website. Is that where they can download it?
Yes, yeah. Anybody who signs up for my email will get that sent to them. So I'm hoping that it will be well utilized as a tool in the field and by families. And I know that school nurses and counselors and teachers as well have put it to use, which I love.
Oh, yes. And that's fantastic. But back to the book, I like, it's so beautiful. The artwork is wonderful. I see you had Youngju Kim. Is that a local artist?
Yeah, very talented artist. Yeah, she's South Korean and living in Georgia when we worked together. And she was just a dream to work with. She really could hear what my vision was for it, and then could bring it to life in ways that I could never dream of.
That's fantastic. So yeah, on this page here, it says that the Nana says to the child, Lee, all of these memories and more will be on your map, Lee. Memory Lane is an amazing place where anyone can go when they want to remember someone. And then on this page here, during their conversation, it says, Nana put her arm around Lee and said, just like how a good hug can hold all sorts of feelings and so much love, so can Memory Lane. That's it.
Love it. Yeah.
We don't have to forget the people we love, and we should curate the memories we have of them and cherish them as a legacy. I remember watching an Oprah show back in the day when I was a stay-at-home mom, and I don't remember who her guest was, but someone said, let's not focus on the day someone died, because they had a whole life and so many things that they gave us. And so we, through the grieving process, we'll shift so that we can honor that. And they just not be forgotten in the day that they left us, right? And so I guess that comes with, kind of normalizing dying, death, and loss. So that's to your profession and creating, the end of life doula thing. How did you become so comfortable with it, and what advice could you give someone listening to bring down their anxiety level about these topics?
Yeah, for me, I started as a birth worker. So I was attending births as a doula, providing emotional, physical, informational support to people, and also a childbirth preparation class educator and a postpartum doula. So that was my entry point into the doula sphere. And then we experienced a number of losses in our family, they happened in quick succession. So I lost 2 of my grandfathers died, my father-in-law, and our dog within just a couple of years. And what I noticed was during those losses, I would naturally shift into my doula presence. And as a lot of people around me would get more anxious, and sometimes people would step away, or they would just feel really uncomfortable and wouldn't know what to do, wouldn't know what to say, I would step closer. I would find myself really drawn to what was happening and wanting to learn from it and wanting to show up and be some sort of support, not knowing exactly what that would entail, because that's what birth taught me to do. Birth taught me to show up and trust and be open, and then be able to kind of move forward or move back in response to the needs of the moment, which would shift and sway and be wild and unpredictable. And being able to see that process through and that intensity through gave me the preparation I needed to also enter into, anticipatory loss and then death and grief as well. And wanting to give people tools and language so that they could increase what we call death literacy, grief literacy, our knowledge and understanding of it, and create a language around it and create spaces where we could talk about it, where we could share about our losses. Because when I tell somebody, when I introduce myself to someone, I'm sure you get this as well, we often hear a story. There's a story right there that's just been waiting to come out, just been waiting for that invitation. We carry them, but we're not often able to share them. And so I'm a huge proponent of being able to share and communicate, deeper than chit chat, really get into these complex topics. And that will help us when we share our stories, share our tools, share our approaches. It creates more courage and a frame of reference for navigating this difficult terrain.
Yes, those stories are there and the people don't have a form, right? It's that tug of war I mentioned. They may be struggling silently, even within families. A daughter, it may be grieving the loss of her mom. Her dad is grieving the loss of his wife, and they're not able to support each other. So they're grieving alone, because everyone is navigating in their own way. And you saying that about the stories being right there, it just reminded me of when we tell people what we do, we either get the, oh, ooh, oh, that's hard, all that stuff. Sometimes we're like, people are like, oh, I had a great experience with hospice, for me. But I'm brought to mind being in Macy's one time. I mean, a lady literally burst into tears at the clinic counter. And it's just like, oh, because she wasn't able to share. And, it's my intention and hope that us having conversations like that can normalize things in our culture, in our society. And so people are not walking around isolated like the children and not able to share memories of their loved ones and their pain and be able to metabolize the pain because it needs to be processed so it's not held until a midlife crisis, which some I'm witnessing right now. So
yeah, and people who show up to my trainings, I've taught end of life doula training programs, workshops. I'm leading a death literacy specialist program currently. Adults show up to these programs, and when they feel comfortable enough to kind of revisit these moments, they will often share, when I was a kid, I experienced this loss and I didn't have someone to talk to. The adults in my life were trying to protect me, and so they didn't include me. And they thought that that was the way to provide some comfort and reassurance, but all it did was create more questions and worry and doubt. And just so much went unanswered. And then a lot of kids, they're not welcomed into the times of a memorial or a burial, or, they're kind of kept away. And I get it. I get the intention behind that, but it's inevitable. We are all going to experience loss. It's part of life. So because it's inevitable, I feel like we owe it to our young people to make sure that they are prepared. Huge proponent of healthy preparedness. I mean, we have to meet them where they are. You have to think about their developmental stage. You have to think about their questions, but we also don't have to feel like we have all of the answers in order to engage in these conversations. We don't. And it's okay if we say, wow, that is a really big question. And we kind of bounce it back. What do you think? And then we can wonder alongside them. That's okay too. We're creating space for the conversation to happen so that young people don't feel so alone in their worries and their thoughts.
That's it. I'm like speechless. I had a question I was thinking about, but that's it. So tell the people how they find you and engage with you. What's the best way to learn more about Francesca?
Definitely my website. So either go to contemplativedoula.com or my name, francescalynarnoldy.com, and both will take you to the same place. That's my home base. And from there, you can learn about my other books. You can learn about my programs, upcoming retreats or workshops, offerings like that.
That's fantastic. And now remember, I learned about end of life doulas, death doulas, which some people are having some challenge understanding, but I learned about this discipline, this profession, that's this great, wonderful thing through End of Life University with Dr. Karen Wyatt. I think you were the guest, and I heard about your program. In Vermont, and I was just like blown away. Like, whoa. I mean, I had no idea. I knew I wanted to be end of life care because that's why I was listening to it. I was doing hospice, but I had no idea. There's so many resources. No need to reinvent the wheel. I love how we're creating space for people to have healthy death awareness and just, bring the children in. That's my main thing, goal and intention today. So everyone, if you know anyone that could benefit from this book, Map of Memory Lane, get it, go to the website and download that workbook. Maybe use it for yourself. Maybe you're in your 40s or 50s like me. Get it, do it. Maybe you need to do it for something you experienced when you were a child. And so that's all I have to say. Any final words for our audience before we let you go?
No, but thank you so much for this chance to reconnect and talk about our work as a hospice volunteer. I'm so appreciative of the work you do in the field, and I love that we are now colleagues and friends.
Yes, we are indeed. So thank you for being here. We're going to sign out on this episode. Peace, everyone.